Hi folks, you're with Tacitus to your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to really follow on from an essay I did a day or two ago about bright students, supposedly Asian students, so Chinese and Indian students perform much better in examinations and getting grades and so on than the local white students do. This is on average in say the US, but there's also allegedly the same outcomes in whether it be Britain or Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So, does IQ follow the wealth of a nation? Now, putting aside natural wealth, for example, a Middle Eastern country with an average IQ of 87, but if they've got vast amounts of oil, shitloads of it, then it can still be quite a rich country per capita and overall, even though the IQ is low. Now, if you look at an area where the IQ is not particularly high, where they have no natural resources or no developed natural resources, or underdeveloped natural resources, then you can still have a rather poor natural resources, or underdeveloped natural resources, then you can still have a rather poor country. So is there a direct relationship between average IQ and the wealth of a nation? Well, there is a reasonable relationship. The nations with the lowest IQ, in the 70s and so on, which is certainly in Australian terms, you've got an IQ below 80, you're legally classified as handicapped, intellectually handicapped. So there are countries in the world that have an IQ of less than 80 as the average. So you got to assume there are plenty of people around there with an IQ of like 60 or something. But anyway, they tend to be the poorer countries. So if you look at IQ average across the globe, then there is a relation. It's not a complete and exact in every situation, but you could say in an overall sense there's a relationship between low IQ and national poverty. The reverse being approximately the case between high IQ and national wealth. So say for example in the international IQ tables, it's alleged that the Japanese, going off the top of my head here, I think it was 107, and it steps down from there, 106 for like South Korea, for example, and so on. But the relationship between Japan's a wealthy country. If you look at the relationship between IQ and wealth, then there is again a reasonable relationship. Now, just on the issue of foreign students coming to the West, again, this is kind of what's kicked the issue off, is that Indians and Chinese, because they're the big numbers that come to the West, you get some Koreans and so on, and more so recently, strangely. I don't know why that is, but you get other places, but typically the Chinese, the Indians are the ones that come to the West in large numbers, whether it be to find work or to study at university. And some of them stump up big bucks, so they don't come from the peasant sort of end of India where the low IQs would be found. These are the people, the wealthiest people, and the people who've had access to the best education and the longest time at school and so on. So we're tending to disproportionately see the wealthier and the better educated people anyway coming to the West. So they're higher IQ folks are coming to study. So on an average, given that they're already the most intelligent of their race, if you will, coming to the West, then we're seeing a disproportionate representation of the most educated people from there. Whereas in the West, because that's where the white people live, we're seeing an average of all the white people, including, if you like, the least educated, least intelligent members of that society. So when you look at a few million of the best educated people from India or China, then you're going to get a higher average IQ in terms of exam results and outcomes than you would for the overall average of 200 million white people. So we need to consider that in some sort of perspective. I guess, when you look at, say, the very brightest of the Indians, as an example, come to the West, and they've got an IQ of, for example, 103, I think it came to, and the average IQ of the US is 99.5, depending on whose numbers you look at, by the way. Now you say, well, gee whiz, the Indians are way brighter, much smarter than the white folks. But again, there's only a few million of the brightest Indians that are being captured in that sort of and that measurement. Whereas again, it's in the case of the United States, it's 200 plus million white people. So whereas if you took the cream of the crop of the white people, the very, very brightest of the white people, then you'd have an IQ, I would speculate, over 110. So by comparing a small group of the most intelligent Indians or most intelligent Chinese with an entire mass of white people, that isn't giving you any useful, I don't believe, any useful numbers to work with. Now, coming back to on the other side of it, because I always hear this every year, Indians, they're so clever, they're so bright. And again, I don't see it. I just haven't found it. Again, as you talk to the Brahmins, the demigods, the guys at the apex of Indian society, they are pleasant to talk to. It's discussing Socratic philosophy and that sort of thing, and that's fine. But you get away from that, and whatever intelligence they have just melts away almost instantly. So, in my view, but if these Indians are so bright and they're the elite, they control the levers of government, they control the business sector, they control the finance, they control everything in India, from the very top. And yet, so India must be a very rich place with all these bright people. Whether these people be bright at the apex, controlling everything, or everybody's bright there, it's almost by the by. But India is a dirt poor per capita, fucking dirt poor basket case. And you walk over dead bodies in the street there. And for those of you unaware, they've got a caste, C-A-S-T-E, a caste system. It's like a societal ordering of the people at the top, and then the untouchable shit on your shoes peasants at the bottom. And they've still very much got that structure, although that some tell me is changing. I can't really see it. The rich elites, if they are highly intelligent, they're certainly not acting or operating or managing the Indian economy and society for the betterment of all, or far from it, in my view. So they're just happy to stay at the top, as an elite, enriching themselves and living a life of demigods. But so they're either their intelligence is illusory, or they're not applying it for the betterment of their fellow citizens, or both. So I can't see it. Now, again, India's very poor, so they've got all these fucking bright people. Why is the per capita, like it's something like $1,700 a year per capita there? Now, they may scream and cry, well, the white people took everything, that's why it's poor. That's bullshit. And even if that was true, the whites haven't been there for over 75 years. So, you've had plenty of time to build the wealth up if you wanted to. And they really haven't. The wealth is approximately the same today as it was 75 years ago, even though the population's much greater now. So I would say the Indian elite have failed comprehensively to run the economy and to develop new wealth in which their fellow citizens can share. Not that new wealth hasn't occurred since the 90s, but that's really because the West has been transporting jobs, call center and all sorts of jobs being, IT, programming, all sorts of jobs being transferred to India just to take advantage of the cheap labor. And not because Indians are brighter or do a better job. In fact, it's the opposite. Whenever I've used Indian companies for any sort of work, I've always been disappointed. It's lower quality work, takes them much longer to do it. And so really the saving of money because of their cheap labor, it's a false economy. Because given the extra time they take and how much they fuck up that has to be repaired and made good on, then you end up nowhere. You're just not in front, in spite of the cheap labour. Even like a programmer that I remember there was a time programmers in Australia cost $100,000 a year. whereas a program in India would cost 5,000 a year. So a 95% saving on the labour. Even then, it wasn't worth it because the quality of work they did was so poor. Now, coming to China. Now, the same thing. So the Chinese students, they're so clever, they're so hardworking, they're so diligent, they study so hard. And I don't doubt they do, by the way. The Indians and the Chinese do study quite hard, and they swat and cram in a way, because that's very much part of their culture, incidentally. They're not per se more diligent. That's just how they do things there. Now, but again, China, on a per capita basis, China's nowhere near the West, and so all these highly intelligent Chinese students and Chinese people, it doesn't seem to translate into economic success. And again, with China, the idea was to bring a huge populous nation like China into the world economy, coming out of the communist era into the world economy. So there was a decision made by the World Economic Forum and the globalists to transfer vast numbers of Western jobs to China, with the idea of creating a consumer economy in China that would add, a billion plus consumers to the world economy, and that would be good for everybody. And But the reality is that that's all. I mean, that's the extent of China's growth. Without the West transferring those gazillions of jobs to China and investing in it, the Chinese economy wouldn't even have grown by a quarter as much as it has. It's only grown because the West decided to transfer masses of jobs over there in a short space of time. That's the only reason. So really, China, based on its own resources and the ingenuity and intelligence of its own people, it wouldn't have got anywhere near where it is now. So if there is this higher intelligence, I don't see it. Now, in terms of the Japanese mixed or combined, I should say, an awesome discipline and focus with intense study. Now, you find that really any country in the world that's got a large and complex alphabet typically also has a higher IQ on average. So there's definitely a relationship where the brain is getting exercised much more because of this large and complex alphabet. And it's alleged, I mean, I can't vouch for this personally because my Japanese isn't good enough, particularly not written Japanese, but the Japanese are supposed to have the most complex alphabet in the world, and they happen to be also the highest IQ in the world, so it's alleged. Now, if you look at, say, the Korean alphabet, again, quite complex there in the top 10. And so if you go through the most complex alphabets, then there's an overrepresentation of high IQ countries in that group. But the Japanese, while having an IQ, they also had the discipline and the focus. And if you look at the period 1870 or 1871, say to even 1895, and within a 25-year span, the Japanese were able to establish themselves as the leading technological and military power in East Asia from 1870, because they'd been like almost a feudal society for hundreds of years. And then they opened up and decided, there was a sort of a vision their government took, that if we don't modernize and become an advanced technological society, we'll always be a vassal of the Western powers. So they with great energy and vigor and determination, set out to be an economic, technological, and of course military power, as is in the late 1800s, of some substance, and they achieved that in incredible space time. It's got to be one of the most remarkable feats in modern history, in my view. Now, then they went from that to being having sufficient military power and technology to challenge the Western powers in 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor, and they were a huge success. They came very close to achieving a victory there, and they were, they gambled a little bit on the Americans deciding it was all too hard, but they came very close to succeeding. If you look at the Japanese military exploits in World War II, they, given the resources they had, they constantly outclassed all the European powers and often the Americans as well. The Americans had a much greater materiel advantage, and this was quite decisive. But say if you look at the jungle warfare in their military engagement with the British, and the British, theoretically had a lot of jungle warfare expertise, but the Japanese were able to, almost without breaking a sweat, constantly outmaneuver and outclass the British soldiers in Asia. They defeated the British in Malaysia and Singapore, even though the British outnumbered them 2-1 and had quite a decisive materiel advantage. And yet the British were outclassed endlessly at every engagement. They were made to look like two-bit amateurs. In the end, they surrendered to an enemy that was inferior in manpower and in materiel. I mean, it was one of the saddest, most disgusting episodes, I think, in British military history. But anyway, that take nothing away from the Japanese on this. They had done quite well. So the Japanese had a tradition and history of very, very noticeable overachievement and high-level achievement. So that I don't doubt that their position is the highest IQ. Whenever I visited Japan or worked with Japanese people, with some exceptions, I've always come away impressed with their I'm not sure intellect overall, but the intensity of their focus on the issues and the iron discipline they have of approaching a task and getting it done. So I've always been impressed with that, whereas I've hardly ever been impressed with the Chinese on that, and to some extent for the Koreans. The Koreans were also until recently quite corrupt, so I think that takes away from it. But just on so does the high IQ translate into national wealth? There is a relationship there, but it's not guaranteed. You're more likely to live in a wealth society if you have a higher IQ. Now, to what extent that higher IQ is developed or innate or natural, that's a separate matter. Like say when you're in school or college, school in particular, because college they start to filter out and get only the brightest, but did. But I mean, in high school there were kids that just seemed to be much cleverer than everyone else, and kids who seemed to be much dumber than everyone else. So there's still quite a wide range here. But coming back to the sort of the source of this, these so-called bright Asian kids that come to the West, again, we've got a small number. They're the cream of the crop from those places, but they don't. In India and China, on a per capita basis, they're quite poor countries. So if they are much brighter, then they can't translate that into national wealth. Now, coming at it from the other side, the dumbing down of Western education, which is manifestly being dumbed down, then does that mean that the West will become relatively poorer because they're dumbing down? Then I would say the answer is yes. I'd say it is, because when people are dumber, they're not participating, and the West became wealthy as much as anything on civic participation and freedoms. Those freedoms and that concept of civic participation are disappearing at a rate of not being forced upon us by the globalists, by the way. And so will that translate into being poorer, the Western countries being poorer? Then yes, I think it will be. You were Tacitus today, you were Pushback Channel. Thank you for listening.